What's the dumbest reason someone almost let you die? My parents had one family tradition. I needed my golden sister's permission to seek medical help. I was watching Darina film her birthday haul when my throat started tingling. I reached for my EpiPen in the kitchen drawer, but Mom snatched it away. Darina, does Kara need this? My sister didn't look up. She's fine. You heard your sister. Mom locked my EpiPen in her purse. No attention seeking today. Darina's about to announce her new sponsorship. The rule had been in place since I was 11. The day I faked anaphylaxis during Darina's TikTok viral moment. I hadn't faked it. Mom had used peanut oil in dinner. But Darina said I was jealous of her hitting 100,000 followers, so that became the truth. From then on, every reaction, every rash, every swollen throat had to be verified by the golden child. Can't. Swallow. The familiar tightness was starting, like a fist closing around my windpipe. Kara! Dad's voice boomed from behind his camera. What do we do when you claim you're sick? I knew the script. Ask Darina first. And what did Darina say? Darina finally looked up, annoyed. I said she's fine. God, Kara, do you have to make everything about you? I'm literally about to secure a $300 deal. My tongue was thickening like a sponge soaking up water. Each breath felt like sucking air through a coffee stirrer. Please, I gasped. Need hospital. Mom, Darina whined. She's doing it again. The brand manager is watching my live. Mom rushed to comfort Darina. Don't worry, sweetie. Kara, go to your room if you're going to act like this. The viewers are watching. I tried to stand but had to grip the counter. Red welts were blooming across my arms like boils. Look. I held out my hands, already swelling. Darina laughed. She probably rubbed something on them. Remember when she faked hives during my Shein haul? She turned to her phone. Guys, my sister is literally so desperate for attention right now. The doorbell rang. Darina's photographer was here for her announcement shoot. Kara, get out of my sight, Dad ordered. This photo shoot could change everything. We don't need you wheezing in the background. I couldn't move. My face was puffing up, eyes swelling shut. Every breath was a battle I was losing. Mom, please, there were peanuts and chocolate. Darina, Mom called out sweetly. Your sister's claiming allergic reaction. What do you think? Darina stood directly in front of me, blocking her camera's view. The look in her eyes told me she knew exactly what she was doing. She's faking, Darina announced loudly. She's just mad about my deal. Classic sabotage. I knew it, Mom shouted. Kara, stop this immediately. That's when my throat closed completely. Darina's photographer, Samuel, walked in and froze. What's wrong with her? Nothing, Darina said quickly. She's being dramatic. Let's shoot in the other room. Darina, she's coughing blood. It's probably red paint. Darina stepped in front of me again. Everything's perfect. Let's start with the unboxing shots. But Samuel had a daughter with allergies. He dropped his camera and grabbed my wrist. Her pulse is racing. This is anaphylaxis. No one does anything without Darina giving the green light. Rules are rules. What? Samuel was already dialing 911. Give me that phone. Dad lunged for it. Are you insane? She's dying. Darina? Mom turned desperately to my sister. Is Kara dying? Darina hesitated. Her live viewer count had hit a new record. The comments were exploding. Brand deals worth hundreds of thousands were watching. No, Darina said firmly. She's not dying. She does this every time something important happens to me. That's when I collapsed completely. The silence was immediate. Kara? Darina's voice wavered slightly. Stop it. This is my biggest moment. She's not breathing, Samuel screamed. Where's her EpiPen? More people were arriving. Darina's manager, the executives. Everyone was screaming. This is Kara's fault. Darina was sobbing into her phone. The last thing I heard was Darina screaming. She's trying to ruin my career. Even dying, she's trying to ruin me. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU. The doctor said I'd been clinically dead for 4 minutes. 4 minutes where my parents waited for Darina's permission to save me. My parents couldn't look at me. They just kept saying Darina's career and the sponsorship deal over and over. But Darina had live-streamed everything, and I was going to destroy her. The ceiling tiles had exactly 47 dots in each square, and I'd counted them 12 times already when the nurse came in to check my blood pressure again. She wrapped the cuff around my arm while I kept my hand on my throat, feeling for the bump where they'd shoved the breathing tube down to keep me alive. The machine beeped and she wrote numbers on her clipboard while Mom and Dad stood by the door talking in those loud whispers that aren't actually quiet at all. Mom kept saying something about damage control, and Dad was scrolling through his phone showing her dropping follower counts. Neither of them had looked at me once since I woke up. The nurse left, and the attending physician walked in carrying a thick folder with my name on it. He pulled up a chair next to my bed and opened the folder to show me a chart with red lines dropping way below some dotted line marked critical. He pointed to the lowest part where the line almost touched the bottom of the page and explained that was when my brain stopped getting enough oxygen. Another 60 seconds at that level, and I would have had permanent brain damage, maybe never walked or talked right again. He kept looking between me and my parents while asking why my EpiPen wasn't used when I first showed symptoms of anaphylaxis. Mom started to answer, but he cut her off and said he was asking me. I tried to talk, but my throat hurt so bad I could only whisper that they took it away. The doctor's face got this look I'd never seen before on an adult, like he was trying not to explode. Someone knocked on the door, and a man in a button-up shirt walked in carrying a clipboard with Hospital Social Services printed at the top. He introduced himself as Jacob Shields and said he needed to speak with me privately about my admission. Dad immediately stepped forward saying that wasn't necessary, but Jacob pulled out some official-looking paper and said it was required protocol when someone arrives clinically dead from anaphylaxis, especially when the patient is 18 and can make their own medical decisions. My parents looked at each other and Mom grabbed her purse so tight her knuckles went white, but they had to leave. Jacob waited until the door clicked shut, then sat down and asked in this really gentle voice if I felt safe going home with my family. I started crying and couldn't stop. The next morning, I woke up to Samuel standing in my doorway, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers and a small black memory card. His hands were shaking when he set the flowers on my bedside table, and he kept apologizing over and over. He told me his daughter Emma has the same peanut allergy, and he knew exactly what was happening to me the second he walked into that kitchen. He'd started recording on his personal camera before Darina went live because he always did test shots first. The memory card had everything from when Mom took my EpiPen away to when Darina said I was faking while I was turning blue. He said he'd already made 3 backup copies and would testify to whatever I needed. His voice cracked when he said he couldn't sleep, knowing he almost watched someone's daughter die for social media content. Around lunchtime, my parents came back and Mom immediately launched into this speech about how we all needed to support Darina through this difficult time because the internet was being so cruel to her. Dad added that 2 more brands had already dropped her, and if she lost the beauty deal, the family would be in serious financial trouble. They went on for 10 minutes about Darina's mental health and her career, and how unfair everyone was being to her. Not once did either of them ask how I felt, or mention that I literally died for 4 minutes. Mom even said I needed to think about how my actions were affecting my sister's future. The hospital pharmacist knocked and came in with a prescription pad and forms for EpiPens. She explained that since I was 18, I could sign for my own prescriptions without needing anyone else's permission. I ordered 6 EpiPens right there in front of my parents, and told the pharmacist I wanted them sent to different locations, some to the hospital pharmacy for pickup, some to the CVS near campus. Mom tried to object, saying it was too expensive, but the pharmacist just looked at her and said insurance would cover them given the severity of my documented reaction. Dad muttered something about me being dramatic, but I kept signing forms. Later that afternoon, Jacob came back with a thick packet of discharge planning paperwork. He went through each page with me, creating a safety plan that included keeping my medical devices with me at all times, having emergency contacts who weren't family members, and establishing safe places I could go if I felt threatened. We agreed I would go home for now since I didn't have anywhere else to stay, but he gave me his direct number and said to call immediately if anyone tried to take my medication again. He also gave me a card for someone named Moira Calderon who worked in legal aid. When the nurse brought my phone back that evening, I had over 300 notifications. The live stream clips were everywhere with millions of views. The comments were a complete mess, with some people saying I was obviously dying and others claiming I was the best actress they'd ever seen. But what made me sick was that Darina's video of herself crying about her ruined career had twice as many views as the clip of me actually dying. She'd posted it while I was still in the ICU and gotten hundreds of thousands of likes from fans saying I was jealous and tried to ruin her big moment. The next morning, I saw the beauty brand had released an official statement calling the whole thing an unfortunate misunderstanding and saying they stood by their creator during this difficult time. They actually used the word miscommunication to describe me dying. The statement said they were confident the situation had been blown out of proportion, and they looked forward to continuing their partnership with Darina. My stomach dropped when I realized they had lawyers and PR teams already working to make this go away. Before I left the hospital, I scheduled an appointment with Fletcher Goodman, an allergist the hospital recommended. The receptionist said he was booked solid, but when she heard I'd been clinically dead from anaphylaxis, she found an opening for the next week and marked it as urgent in the system. That evening, I sat at the small desk in my room with a notebook and started writing down everything I could remember. My hand moved fast across the paper as memories came flooding back. The time when I was 12 and Mom made cookies with almond flour right before Darina's first brand partnership meeting. My throat had started closing during her big moment, and Dad had locked me in the bathroom. The reaction when I was 14 during Darina's Sweet 16 party livestream. Mom had put cashews in the salad, and when I started wheezing, Darina told everyone I was jealous. I wrote down dates and times and matched them to Darina's social media posts. Every single reaction happened within days of her hitting a new follower milestone or getting a sponsorship. The pattern was so clear it made me sick to my stomach. Jacob called the next morning and said he'd set up a meeting with someone from legal aid. Her name was Moira Calderon, and she specialized in family abuse cases involving medical neglect. I took the bus to her office downtown and brought my notebook full of incidents. Moira was younger than I expected, with dark hair pulled back and glasses that made her look serious. She read through my pages without saying anything at first. Then she looked up and told me that withholding life-saving medication was absolutely medical neglect. She agreed to take my case right there. We sat in her small office for 2 hours going through everything. Moira explained I had 3 main options for moving forward. I could file for a protective order to keep my parents from taking my EpiPens ever again. I could pursue criminal charges for child endangerment and medical neglect. Or I could go public with all the evidence from the live stream. She recommended starting with the protective order since it would give me immediate legal protection. We started filling out paperwork right away with Moira helping me write everything in legal language. After leaving her office, I went straight to the hospital records department. The woman at the desk looked concerned when I requested all my emergency room visits from the past 7 years. It took her almost an hour to pull everything from their system. She handed me a stack of papers thicker than a textbook. Each visit was documented with arrival times and treatment notes and discharge summaries. Every single one showed I'd arrived in severe allergic distress. The treatment notes all mentioned delays in administering epinephrine. One doctor had even written that earlier intervention would have prevented the severity of symptoms. I made copies of everything and put the originals in a safe deposit box at the bank. The next day, I went back to the hospital to file a formal request for security footage. The administrator behind the desk said it would take a few days to process my request. She confirmed they had cameras at the emergency entrance and in the waiting area. Samuel had carried me in through those doors while I was dying. That footage would show everything, including how long it took before I got treatment. My phone buzzed with a text from Samuel saying he had something important to share. He'd kept all the raw footage from before Darina went live that day. His camera had been recording when my parents refused to give me the EpiPen. He had clear audio of Mom saying no one does anything without Darina's permission. He'd already made backup copies on multiple drives and offered to give them all to my lawyer. I texted Moira immediately, and she said this was exactly the evidence we needed. That afternoon, Moira and I worked on drafting a statement of facts for the court. She helped me write everything without emotional language or accusations that could be challenged. We focused on medical timelines and documented symptoms and test results. We included the fact that I was clinically dead for 4 minutes. Every word was carefully chosen to be factual and impossible to dispute. Moira said we'd hold the statement until the right moment when it would have maximum impact. That night, my phone lit up with a DM notification from Darina. She wrote that I better not do anything I'd regret, and that she knew people who could make my life miserable. She said her fans were loyal and would destroy me if I tried to hurt her career. I took screenshots of every message, including the timestamps. I forwarded everything to Moira, who replied immediately saying this was textbook witness intimidation. She added it to our growing file of evidence against my family. The next morning, a courier knocked on my door with an envelope from a downtown law firm. Inside was a cease and desist letter from lawyers representing the beauty brand. They demanded I make no public statements about the incident that could damage their client's reputation. The letter threatened legal action if I spoke publicly about what happened. I scanned it and sent it to Moira, who actually laughed when she read it. She said they had absolutely no legal grounds to silence me about my own medical emergency. She drafted a response letter basically telling them to back off. Later that day, I needed groceries and walked to the store near campus. Everything was fine until I reached the candy aisle and saw rows of chocolate bars. My hands started shaking as I picked up each one to read the labels. I checked ingredients 3 times on every single package, even though I wasn't buying any. An employee came over and asked if I needed help finding something. I couldn't speak and just stood there shaking. I left without buying anything and ran back to my apartment. The next morning, Fletcher Goodman's office was freezing and smelled like hand sanitizer mixed with that weird medical plastic smell. He had me sit in this uncomfortable chair while his nurse stuck 20 different allergen samples on my back with these tiny needles. Within 10 minutes, the peanut spot swelled up like a golf ball and turned bright red while the nurse kept taking photos and measuring with a ruler. Fletcher came back in and actually whistled when he saw the reaction size. He had me blow into this machine that measured my breathing capacity, and then pricked my finger for blood tests while explaining that my allergy was off the charts severe. The whole time he kept shaking his head and writing notes about how any delay in treatment could be fatal with reactions this bad. He printed out this thick medical report right there with all the test results and graphs showing my antibody levels were dangerously high. He signed it 3 times and gave me copies while telling me to keep my EpiPens within arm's reach always. That afternoon, Jacob called me into his office at the hospital and showed me this huge stack of paperwork he'd been filling out. He documented every single thing I'd told him about my parents and the permission rule with dates and medical records attached. He explained he was filing an official protective services referral because withholding medication from someone with a documented severe allergy counted as medical neglect. He made copies of everything and walked me through what would happen next, with the investigation taking several weeks, but creating an official paper trail. My phone dinged that night with an email from my parents about how I was destroying the family and betraying everything they'd worked for. They wrote about how they might lose the house without Darina's income, and how could I do this to them after everything they'd sacrificed. I just forwarded it straight to Moira without even typing a response because I was done explaining myself to people who let me die. The next day, I remembered this old diary I'd kept in middle school hidden under my mattress at home. I drove there while my parents were at work and dug it out from my old room, which they'd already started turning into storage for Darina's PR packages. I sat on the floor matching up dates from my diary entries about hospital visits with Darina's social media history on my phone. Every single time she hit some big milestone like 50,000 followers or got a brand partnership, I'd mysteriously had an allergic reaction within 2 or 3 days. The pattern was so obvious it made me want to throw up right there on my childhood bedroom floor. Moira called me the next morning saying this reporter named Aaron Rutledge had reached out wanting a comment about what happened. She said we should wait until after the protective order hearing to talk to any media, but she kept his contact info in case we needed press attention later if the legal stuff didn't work. That night, I set up my phone on my dresser and just started talking to the camera about everything that had happened from the beginning. I cried through most of it and had to stop 3 times to catch my breath. But when I finished, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally gotten poison out of my system. I sent the video to Eliana Bergman, who'd become my therapist, and she texted back that this was good progress in processing the trauma. 2 weeks after I'd left the hospital, I sat in this small courtroom while the judge read through all the evidence we'd submitted. She looked over her glasses at my parents when she read the part about them taking my EpiPens and then granted a temporary protective order that legally required them to let me keep my medical devices. It was only valid for 2 weeks until the full hearing, but it meant they couldn't legally take my EpiPens anymore without facing criminal charges. The next day, some lawyer I'd never heard of called Moira saying he represented Darina's management team, and they wanted to offer me money to sign an NDA. The number he mentioned would cover all my medical bills plus 4 years of college with money left over, but it came with a permanent gag order about everything that happened. I told Moira I wanted to counter their offer with my own terms instead of just taking money to shut up. We drafted a response asking for public acknowledgement of what happened, mandatory family therapy for all of us, and a medical fund for my ongoing allergy care. I refused any deal that required me to stay silent about almost dying while my sister filmed it for content. We gave them 48 hours to respond to our counter-proposal. Someone leaked a bunch of internal emails to Moira from the beauty brand's crisis management team, discussing how to handle what they called the allergy incident for PR purposes. One executive had actually written that my death would have been easier to manage than having me alive to tell the story. Another email talked about whether they could claim I'd staged the whole thing for attention, even though they knew that was impossible. Moira printed everything out and added it to our growing evidence file, while I sat there reading these people discussing my death like it was just a PR problem to solve. 3 days later, I was staying at my friend's place when someone started pounding on the door so hard the whole frame shook. Through the peephole, I saw Mom and Dad standing there with their arms crossed. Dad kicked the door while Mom yelled that they knew I was in there. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and started recording while they kept banging harder and harder. Mom screamed that I needed to give them back the EpiPens because they cost too much money to waste on someone who was faking. I dialed 911 while Dad tried the doorknob and then started throwing his shoulder against the door. The operator asked what my emergency was, and I explained my parents were trying to break into my friend's apartment. She said she'd send someone right away, but it took 20 minutes for the cop to show up. By then, my parents had moved to banging on the windows, and Mom was crying about how I was destroying our family. The officer looked annoyed when he got there and barely wrote anything down in his little notebook. He told me this sounded like a family matter and suggested we all go to counseling together instead of getting the law involved. I showed him the protective order, but he just shrugged and said civil matters weren't really his department. I made him give me his badge number, which he did while rolling his eyes. Later that day, I called Moira and told her what happened. She said this was typical, but we needed the documentation anyway, so I should file a formal complaint about the officer's response. I spent 2 hours at the police station filling out forms about how they didn't enforce the protective order. The desk sergeant kept asking if I was sure I wanted to make a big deal out of a family disagreement. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I scrolled through the photos on my phone from the hospital. One showed the itemized bill with every charge listed out, including the cost of being dead for 4 minutes. Without really thinking about it, I posted the photo with just the caption about being dead for 4 minutes and spending 3 days in the ICU. I didn't mention anyone's name or say anything about my family at all. Within 10 minutes, the comments started exploding with people asking what happened and saying they recognized me from Darina's live stream. Some people called me brave, while others said I was just trying to get attention by posting my medical bills. The next morning, Darina posted a video of herself crying into her ring light about how she was bullied online. She kept wiping her tears and saying she never meant for anything bad to happen, but she didn't actually apologize or admit she did anything wrong. Instead, she talked about losing her sponsorships and how hard this whole thing had been for her. Her remaining fans flooded my post calling me evil for ruining her career over a misunderstanding. They said I should have just stayed quiet if I really cared about family. Samuel must have seen what was happening because that afternoon he posted his own statement on his photography page. He didn't attack anyone, but he made it clear that he called 911 because he recognized the signs of anaphylaxis, and the family wasn't helping. He mentioned having a daughter with allergies and knowing how fast things can go bad without treatment. Some people started commenting that maybe there was more to the story than Darina was saying. That's when things got really scary because someone found my friend's address and posted it online. They told people to go teach me a lesson about destroying innocent people's careers for clout. Moira immediately started filing takedown requests, but new posts kept popping up faster than she could get them removed. I went to the hardware store and bought extra deadbolts plus one of those doorstop alarms. The guy at the store helped me pick out a security camera that would send alerts to my phone if anyone came near the door. I installed everything myself while my hands wouldn't stop shaking because I kept thinking someone might show up any second. 2 days later, I had my first real session with Eliana, who specialized in family trauma. She listened to me tell the whole story without interrupting once, and then said what happened to me was medical abuse, not normal family dynamics. I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe because it was the first time a professional said out loud that what my family did was abuse. She explained that making me get permission for medical care was a form of control that could have killed me. We talked about how I wasn't responsible for my parents' choices or for Darina losing her sponsorships. The next week, Fletcher scheduled an oral food challenge to document my allergic response in a controlled medical setting. He had nurses ready with IVs and epinephrine, but he still wanted to see how my body reacted to peanuts with monitoring. I ate a tiny piece of peanut butter on a cracker, and within 2 minutes, my throat started closing up. The welts spread across my arms so fast the nurse started the IV immediately. Fletcher stopped the test right away and gave me a shot of epinephrine while documenting everything with photos and measurements. He wrote in his report that my reaction was severe enough to cause death without immediate treatment. After that, Moira and I spent 2 whole days getting ready for the protective order hearing. We went through every piece of evidence and practiced what I would say when the judge asked me questions. She made me practice staying calm even when she asked hostile questions like the other lawyer would. We organized all the medical records and screenshots and Samuel's footage into labeled folders. The morning of the hearing, my stomach hurt so bad I threw up twice before we even got to the courthouse. In the courtroom, the judge looked through everything while my parents' lawyer kept saying this was all just a family miscommunication. The lawyer said my parents loved me and just wanted what was best for our family unit. But then the judge watched Samuel's footage on her laptop and her face got really serious. She read through Darina's messages threatening me and looked at the medical reports showing I'd been dead for 4 minutes. When she finally spoke, she said the evidence was overwhelming that my life had been endangered. She extended the protective order for a full year and told my parents they couldn't come within 500 feet of me. Aaron's article dropped online 3 days later while I was eating breakfast at my friend's kitchen table, and my phone started buzzing with notifications from people I hadn't talked to in years. He never used our names, but wrote about a young woman who nearly died while her influencer sister live-streamed the whole thing, and everyone who'd been following the story knew exactly who he meant. The piece spread across social media faster than anything Darina had ever posted, with people sharing their own stories about toxic family dynamics and medical neglect in the comments. Within hours, the beauty brand released a statement saying they were suspending their partnership with Darina pending an internal review of the incident, which meant she'd just lost a deal worth hundreds of thousands over the contract term. Dad's text came through while I was reading the brand's statement, just 3 words saying I'd ruined everything. But I deleted it without responding because Moira had told me not to engage with any communication that tried to make me feel guilty. The next morning, Samuel showed up at my friend's place with boxes and insisted on helping me move into a tiny studio apartment he'd found through his real estate contacts. He wouldn't let me pay him back for the deposit and first month's rent, saying it was the least he could do after watching my family almost let me die, and he even hired movers to get my stuff from storage. The apartment was smaller than my childhood bedroom, and 40 minutes from campus by bus. But when I walked through the door and locked it behind me, I could finally breathe without checking over my shoulder. I spent the first night arranging my EpiPens in different spots around the single room, one in the kitchen drawer, one by the bed, one in my backpack, making sure I'd never be more than 10 feet from life-saving medication again. 6 weeks after the original incident, we had the full protective order hearing in a bigger courtroom with more people present. I brought 3 binders of evidence, including all my medical records from the past 7 years, screenshots of every threatening message Darina had sent, and printed frames from Samuel's footage, showing my parents refusing to help while I was dying. Samuel testified first about what he saw that day, how my symptoms were textbook anaphylaxis, and how my parents physically prevented him from calling 911 at first. Fletcher took the stand next with his medical report explaining that my allergy was severe enough to kill me within minutes without treatment, and he showed the judge photos from my controlled food challenge where my reaction started immediately, even with medical staff ready. The judge listened to everything without interrupting, then looked directly at my parents and said the evidence showed a clear pattern of medical neglect that could have resulted in my death. She granted a 2-year protective order and told the prosecutor's office to open a criminal investigation into child endangerment, even though I was technically an adult when the live-streamed incident happened. That night, Dad sent an email through his work account since he couldn't contact me directly, writing 3 pages about how they couldn't afford the mortgage without Darina's influencer income, and how I was making the whole family homeless just to get revenge. Moira helped me write a 2-sentence response stating that their financial decisions weren't my responsibility and requesting no further contact about money matters. 2 days later, I sat in Moira's office across from Aaron with a recorder between us for an on-record interview about everything that had happened. We stuck to pure facts like the medical timeline showing I was without oxygen for 4 minutes, the documented pattern of denied medical care going back 7 years, and the hospital records confirming I'd been clinically dead. Aaron asked careful questions about each incident without pushing for emotional responses, just building a clear picture of systematic medical neglect that anyone reading would understand. The story ran online the next morning with my full name and a headline about families who gatekeep medical care, generating thousands of shares within the first hour. My inbox flooded with messages from people whose parents had ignored their asthma attacks, or whose siblings had hidden their insulin, or whose families had thrown away their anxiety medication. Each story made me realize how many people had lived through similar nightmares, but never had video evidence or a photographer witness to back them up. 3 days after the article, Darina posted a video announcement that she was taking an indefinite break from social media to focus on her mental health and healing. She talked for 10 minutes about the pressure of being in the public eye and needing professional help, but never once admitted she'd done anything wrong or apologized for letting me die. Her remaining fans commented about how brave she was for seeking therapy, while others pointed out she still hadn't acknowledged nearly killing her sister. I started developing strict routines to manage my anxiety around food, spending Sunday afternoons meal prepping in my tiny kitchen with every ingredient triple-checked for allergens. My backpack had a whole pocket just for medical supplies, including 3 EpiPens, Benadryl, and a laminated card with emergency instructions in case I couldn't speak. Some days I'd stand in the grocery store for 20 minutes reading the same label over and over because my brain couldn't trust what my eyes were seeing, but Eliana's breathing exercises helped me push through the panic. Every morning I'd check expiration dates on my medications and test the practice EpiPen trainer to make sure I remembered the motion, building muscle memory that might save my life someday. Moira filed the civil suit on a Tuesday morning, seeking damages for medical expenses, ongoing therapy costs, and the years of trauma from intentional infliction of emotional distress. We weren't asking for millions or trying to destroy my family financially, just enough to cover my medical care for the next few years and make sure I could afford the specialists I needed. The goal was getting a legal acknowledgement that what they did was wrong, creating a paper trail that said denying someone life-saving medication was abuse, not tough love or family discipline. 3 weeks later, Moira called to say the mediation was scheduled for next month and asked what I wanted from my family. I sat at her conference table with my notebook full of medical bills and therapy receipts, writing down 3 things that mattered. First, they had to admit in writing that they delayed my medical care during an allergic reaction. Second, they had to attend family therapy with someone who specialized in medical trauma. Third, they had to set up a trust fund for my medical expenses, so I'd never have to beg for EpiPens again. Moira typed everything into a formal document while I watched, adding legal language about mandatory compliance and financial penalties if they broke the agreement. The morning of mediation, I threw up twice from nerves and had to take 3 different buses to get there because I couldn't afford an Uber. My parents showed up with their lawyer in Dad's BMW while Darina arrived separately in a car her manager had sent. We sat in different waiting rooms until the mediator called us into a big conference room with windows overlooking the parking lot. The mediator explained the process while everyone avoided eye contact, then asked Moira to present our terms. Mom started crying when she heard the therapy requirement, but their lawyer whispered something that made her stop. Darina's lawyer pushed back on the admission of delayed care, suggesting we use softer language about miscommunication during a stressful situation. After 4 hours of back and forth, we reached an agreement where they'd sign a statement saying medical care was delayed during my allergic reaction without admitting intent or malice. The trust fund got negotiated down to covering specialists and medication for 5 years instead of 10, but Moira said it was better than nothing. They agreed to weekly therapy sessions with a specialist the court would choose, and Darina would make a public statement acknowledging my reaction was real and serious. Everyone signed the papers while the mediator made copies, and I walked out with legal proof that what happened to me was real. That night, I typed up a final post thanking everyone who'd supported me and explaining I was focusing on healing now. I wrote that certain things would stay private while I worked through them in therapy, and I wouldn't be answering questions about my family anymore. The post got thousands of likes and comments, but I didn't read them, just closed my laptop and went to bed. 2 weeks later, my family started sessions with a therapist who specialized in families where medical neglect had occurred. Darina actually showed up to every session according to the court monitor, using it as part of her image rehabilitation campaign. Dad stopped bringing cameras to family events entirely after the therapist explained how filming had become more important than safety. Mom sat through presentations about anaphylaxis and had to watch videos of what happens when someone doesn't get their EpiPen in time. Aaron sent me his follow-up article before it went live, showing how the beauty brand had completely rewritten their influencer contracts. They now required written confirmation that no one was harmed during content creation and had mandatory safety protocols for any filming involving family members. The brand also started requiring influencers to have liability insurance and added clauses about immediate termination if anyone was endangered during filming. It wasn't a huge victory, but knowing other families might be safer because of what happened to me made the whole nightmare mean something. 3 months after everything started, I sat in Fletcher Goodman's office for my follow-up appointment. He tested my lung function and checked my throat for any lasting damage from the intubation, then showed me my chart on his computer. My emergency response plan was highlighted in yellow with notes about proper EpiPen storage and usage, and he'd documented every safety measure I'd put in place. I had 6 EpiPens now, 1 in my backpack, 1 in my car, 1 at work, 1 in my kitchen, 1 in my bedroom, and 1 in my bathroom. My medical alert bracelet had my allergies engraved on it, along with emergency contact numbers for Goodman and the hospital. He said most of his adult patients didn't manage their conditions half as well as I did, and the systematic approach I'd developed would keep me safe for years. That night, I cooked dinner in my studio apartment, checking every label 3 times before adding ingredients to my pasta. My EpiPen sat on the counter where I could see it the whole time, right next to my phone with 911 on speed dial. The windows were open and I could hear my neighbors talking through the thin walls, but I didn't mind the noise anymore. I ate my safe meal alone at my tiny table. No cameras recording, no one questioning whether I really needed to avoid certain foods, no sister deciding if my symptoms were real. The trauma counselor said I might never feel comfortable eating with my family again, and that was okay. Some trust couldn't be rebuilt, and some damage couldn't be undone. But sitting there with my EpiPen in reach and my medical alert bracelet on my wrist, I knew I'd won the only battle that mattered. I was alive, and I controlled my own survival now. No permission needed. Well, that's gonna wrap it up for me today. Kinda makes you stop and think about things, huh? Appreciate you hanging out and wondering through it all with me. Subscribe for more content like this.